Here we have a topic today called gerrymandering. It is fascinating to political scholars, but more than that, it has a serious moral component to it as well. And it will result in you hearing some hard truths for this one. Okay, so pay attention. This all began with Elbridge Gerry. That's where the gerrymander comes from, and we'll see that in class. It was the state of Massachusetts, and when they divided the districts up for the different representatives, it was noticed that certain districts were drawn in just such a way that it gave Elbridge Gerry the ability to become a representative, when in fact, if those districts were drawn a little differently, there was no chance that he could have been elected. And so forever after, this is known as gerrymandering. Okay? It has been around for hundreds of years, and this is how it works. I've got right here a state. It looks like your basic square state, and in it you have 50% Democrats, and you have 50% Republicans. Now, if you were to draw districts here, we're going to put 3 counties in each district. Then I could simply draw them vertically like this. So if I had 3 counties in each district, I would draw 1 right here, and 2, and 3, and 4, and they would all be in a row, and I would draw them vertically, and I would get a very accurate representation of this state. I would get 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, because this district would vote Republican, and this district would too, and this one would vote Democrat and Democrat, and we would get a 50-50 split of the state, which is a great representation of what this state is. It's very democratic. All right. I can draw these districts differently to get a different result. Take a look here. What if I put all 3 of these Democrats in one district? I draw that one the same. But then instead, I draw them horizontally. So 3, 3, 3, and 3. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 districts. They all have 3 counties in them. But here, this district will vote Republican, 2-1. And this district will vote Republican, 2-1. And this district will vote Republican, 2-1. There'll be 1 Democrat, and there'll be 3 Republicans that come out of this state. Okay? Do you see how undemocratic that is? Because now 75% of the state looks Republican in representatives, but it's only 50% in actual amount of people voting. So what I have done here is called stacking. I've made sure I have majorities of slim majorities here, 2-1, 2-1, 2-1. And packing, I've packed this district full of Democrats. Okay? So a Democrat will win here like 90% to 10%. It'll always be Democratic. So I give up this one to get 3 Republican districts. This is called gerrymandering, when clearly I'm getting a result that is not actually the case. All right? And so this is what happens in many, if not all, states. It happens with both Democrats, and it happens with Republicans. If we were to take a look at Oregon, Oregon is just this way. You will notice that Eastern and Southern Oregon, District 2, is stacked with like 90% Republicans. So whoever is in that Republican district, District 2, it is currently Cliff Benz, it was Greg Walden. Greg Walden spent over 20 years there getting elected over and over and over, and I assume Cliff Benz will too, because it's stacked with Republicans. And then what has happened is all the Republicans across the state of Oregon have been watered down, so District 1, it's Portland, they're going to vote Democrat no matter what. But District 2, District 3, 4, and 5 all look like this, just reversed with a majority Democrat, and the Republicans are watered down in them. Okay? So in Oregon, you have 4 districts that are Republican, or that are Democrat, and 1 district that is Republican, because all the Republicans have been packed into that Eastern Oregon and Southern Oregon area, and then the rest of the Republicans have been watered down, so the Democrats have a majority. It should be 3-2 Democrat, Republican, but if you gerrymander it, You can get 4-1. Okay? So states swing wildly to one political party or the other. Actually, most of America is not that extreme. But what has happened is that because of gerrymandering, it looks like there is huge extremes. And people get it into their heads that a state is like, Oregon is a pure Democrat state. Absolutely not. Or Idaho is a pure Republican state. No, that's not true either. And so because of this gerrymandering, one of the things that is a fallout from it is it looks like we are super polarized. Us against them. And you've seen this play out. And the press loves this. Because remember, the mainstream media, they're corporations. You do have to keep that in mind. They are corporations and they're there to sell something. And what they sell is news, but really the most exciting news is what sells. So if we can pit these people against those people and get them arguing back and forth, then we got something to talk about. Okay? And that's one of the main failings of this, is that our corporatized press system actually keeps us at each other's throats. Okay? So it is very divisive because you make a state all or nothing. And when you do this, it ends up that these districts are really very safe. And what I mean by safe is, I mean it is safe for the person running. This district here will always vote Democrat. And this district here will become a Republican district. And same with this one and same with that one. I could do it in reverse. I could make this all Republicans, and then 1, 2, 3 districts here, and there would be 3 Democratic districts. So with the same set of people, I can give you 2 and 2, 3 and 1, or 1 and 3. I can give you whatever result you want because I draw the boundaries and I can make it happen. So if that's the case, I can make things very safe for these representatives. And they can be there forever. All right? Because this one's always going to vote Republican, this one's always going to vote Democrat, and we know what's going to happen. So the current representatives, 2 of them, Earl Blumenauer in Multnomah County area in Portland, and Peter DeFazio down in Eugene, have been there since I was in high school. We're talking 1986, 1988. These people came into power way back then. And so I remember seeing a young Peter DeFazio speaking for the state of Oregon, and he's been elected ever since. So we're talking like 30 years. That's what I mean by safe. All right? And so it becomes very stagnant. These people are not responsive to the electorate because they know that all they have to do is say, I'm this, D. I'm that, R. And if they have these letters after their name, they know people will vote for it because they won't vote the other way. And they're guaranteed to be elected. Okay? You need to understand that 93% of representatives are voted back. 93%. We have 7% turnover. And you know why most of them turn over? Because they quit. Almost no representatives are voted out of office. If that happens, that's a rare thing. And in this last election, I think the Republicans won 4 seats from the Democrats, and that was like earth-shaking in the House. 4 seats changed hands from Democrat to Republican, and everyone went, whoa, that's amazing. Okay? So that's a pretty rare thing. 93% of them are safe. And so they don't worry about campaigning. They don't worry about doing what you want. They don't worry about listening to you. You can put on a good face, put on a good show, but they know that once they're in, they're locked in. And things are very safe. And as we see in class, there is some incredibly corrupt behavior that comes out of the House. I mean, ethically, we've elected people that are just criminals. Some people are mentally unstable. You know, I'll show you those in class. But some are pretty ingenious about how they make money. And they make a lot of money. People who go into the House usually come out millionaires many times over when they leave. All right? So we're going to see that. 60 Minutes did a special on that. That's not just me, spouting off or whatever. But the whole thing is explained. I've got an article on how special interest groups funnel money to these folks, and they make it work. Michael Baird was the lone voice in the wilderness. He was from the state of Washington, and he served like 6 years there. And he's the one that, spoke to 60 Minutes and said, there's a lot of corruption. People can really make a lot of money on the side in this business. I mean, it's really incredible. So, yes, when I talk about corruption, this is both Republicans and Democrats. This is just rampant in the House of Representatives, because their districts can be moved every 10 years with a census. So these districts can be redrawn however you want to make them. And you can gerrymander them to make them safe. Okay? And so a lot of political parties fight over the position called Secretary of State. And everyone sort of goes, what does the Secretary of State do? Don't they just take notes? No. They draw these boundaries. So that's a lot of power. So for 10 years, these boundaries are stuck. After the 2020, after the 2030 election, the census years, the districts are redrawn and they are gerrymandered to be safe, both for Republicans and Democrats, depending on who that Secretary of State is. So, our Secretary of State of Oregon in 2020 is Shemia Fagan. She is a Democrat, and so the odds are incredibly high that she will keep the state gerrymandered towards Democrats. All right? It happens in Republican states for Republicans, but that's the way it goes. So you can predict how these lines are going to be drawn based upon who gets elected to Secretary of State. Okay? All right. So, what are the results of some of these things? The districts are drawn not only at the national level, these are national to the Washington, D.C. districts that I've been talking about, but also they draw the boundary lines for the state representatives and senators. Okay? So we have 60 districts that are representatives. We have 30 senators that go to Salem, Oregon, and make laws for the state of Oregon. And every one of those districts is gerrymandered as well. Because in the state of Oregon, I'm just going to use the Democrats because they're the ones doing it here. It's done for Republicans in other states. But in this state, what the Democrats have is a double majority. That means that they own both the House and the Senate in Salem at the state level, and they own more than 2/3 of those seats. So under our state constitution, they can do anything. If you have a double majority, the 7 people that are Republicans say, I don't like this, and they just go, get out of here. There's no chance. And so essentially what we have in Oregon is one-party rule. That's it. We are very similar to the Soviet Union, where they had the Communist Party. And that's it. Now remember, I'm talking about both Republicans and Democrats. I'm just using Oregon because it's the Democrats here right now. Okay? So for a state that is like 60-40 Republican-Democrat, you've got the state where 90% of the laws are just written by Democrats, and then they throw a bone to the Republicans every once in a while. So you essentially have one-party rule, and that alienates 40% of your people who are Republicans. 60% make pretty much all the rules. Same thing happens in Republican states. Okay? So I'm not calling out one party or the other. I'm calling out both parties because this was what happens. All right? So this is at the national level, this 93%, but at the state level, the same thing happens. So once you can finagle your way into one of those safe districts, you're golden. You can do a lot of things. Like at the national level, you can commit all kinds of crimes, and you still don't get voted out. It's really quite amazing. Okay? So this is why the United States has become so undemocratic, because gerrymandering has become not just an art, but a science. So there are actual computer algorithms designed by like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those kind of social media platforms that look at how you do things and how you behave, and they coalesce into a pattern of your life, and it tells them how you're going to vote. The social media platforms understand what you're shopping for, sometimes before you even know yourself, and you say, oh wow, that ad, I just got that ad, I was just thinking about that the other day, and there it is. This is data mining. They're taking a look at everything you put online, and they've got this pattern, and they understand how you're going to vote. And beyond that, with computer algorithms, they understand how cities are going to vote, how counties are going to vote, and so I can simply pick and choose the Democrat and Republic areas that I want. I can draw those lines to make them fit. They will all be equal in population, and they will all come with the result that I want. All I have to do is program the parameters into the computer and say, give me as many Democratic districts as possible, and there it is. The computer spits it out. Okay? So the politicians know this and have known this for some time. You know, gerrymandering was sort of an art form back in the 70s, 80s, but once we got into the 90s, computers coming online, every state is gerrymandered perfectly, except for two. We're going to talk about those. Every state in the country is gerrymandered perfectly for the result that people want, because there's such a vast supply of data for them to work with. I know, it's brutal. It's like that Avengers movie, Winter Soldier, where they like have the helicarriers up there, and there's going to target all of these people that are dissidents, that the algorithm that they've programmed in says they will at some point become a problem for the government. And so the idea in Winter Soldier was these helicarriers would just link up with the satellites, have the algorithm, and they would kill people before they even had a chance to rebel. And that's what the leader there, Robert Redford's character that Captain America is fighting with, you know, he says, I can make the lives of 7 billion people peaceful and orderly by killing 2 million. Well, that's not a far-fetched idea. Not the killing part, but with gerrymandering, you can simply use an algorithm. You can figure out how people vote, and you can engineer the result you want. All right? So this 93% is mostly retirees. These people almost never get voted out. And at the state level, it's very much the same way, because the same programs can just be purchased by the political parties, put it in, and there you go. Redraw the boundaries, and you've got your perfect districts with your most efficiently desired result with as many of your people as you can get. Okay? So when we talk about corruption, stagnation, division, and undemocratic results, I'm not treating this lightly. This is pretty brutal. Okay? And you need to understand that. There is one more step here. What has happened is the Supreme Court has ruled on something called affirmative action. That is when there's been racial problems in the past, and so to fix those, we will counter them by being racist in reverse. So what they have actually ruled on is they said you can use gerrymandering to form majority-minority districts. So if some racial group is a minority in any area, you draw the district so that you get as many of their neighborhoods together as you can, so that the minority becomes a majority district. Now what that assumes is that everyone is going to vote on racial lines. So it assumes that all Americans are racist, black, white, brown, everything in between, and that what happens is that's all they see and all they focus on. And they only vote for people who look like them. That's the assumption of this ruling. And so what has happened is districts have been drawn that create majorities of minorities. Think about that. So you've got people voting on racial lines in that district. Who did you leave outside that district? So now you created a supermajority of anyone else that wasn't that minority. So you got to ask yourself with our political leaders, Why do they talk about racism so much? Because as our laws have become more and more friendly to people being equal, they keep saying we're becoming more and more racist. But our laws are going one way, but they keep telling us our attitudes are going the other. If we were to actually become a non-racist society, what would happen to those districts? There would be no need for them. You would have people integrated, and you would have districts drawn, at least based on political parties, but there wouldn't be any more division about race. So if you want to maintain your racial status, if there's a majority-minority district in your state, you've got to hold on to that idea that there's racism everywhere. And the people on the outside, they're also a supermajority of the other race. They have to continually point out the same kind of thing. Oh, this is all about race. And so what you get is a society with its laws moving towards integrated non-racial outcomes, but your leaders to hang on to power are constantly beating the drum of there's racism everywhere. Because if it was to go away, so would their gerrymandered districts. Okay? So at some point, we've got to take the next step in this political science issue here. You need to understand that in this class, I talk a lot about what is and what happens and how things work. The next step is, why do they work the way they do? Why do they not work the way they do? Why should they work in different ways? So you've got to turn that on and think in that higher way at some point. And this is the kind of issue that we're going to start with. At some point, you need to understand you're being played. Okay? Because to send back 93% of the people with these safe districts, it's not democracy. All right? If the districts are predetermined, there's no freedom or democracy there. You're not voting for someone to represent you. You're voting for someone that the computer algorithm has already predetermined you're going to vote for. And they understand that. And so what you're really getting is your democratically elected lord of the manor, and you are the serf, the peasant, that is working away to serve them. And you feel like that you chose them, but you didn't. They chose you. Or they made you think that you chose them, but when you finally figure it out, you realize you've been played. I think there was a famous person who said, there is no one more enslaved than the person who thinks they're free. Okay? So if you think you're voting for your person, if you get all up in arms about, this is my candidate, take a step back. Are they really? Or are they just saying the things that push your buttons so that you'll vote for them? And they know already what buttons to push. They know already what are the hot topic things to say. And they have a list of those things and they say them and you go, oh, yeah. So take a step back. Think it through. All right? This is the problem with gerrymandering. And it causes a lot of issues in our country. And these are the 4 that I put up here, but with divisiveness, racism. There's a real reason why people are dividing across America, because our leaders are saying, you've got to always think about it. And it also takes your eyes away from these kind of things. Why would someone spend $5 million to get a job that's only worth $150,000 a year? Because they can come away with 10 or 20 or 30 million. That's why they spend $5 million. All right? And it only makes sense. It results in a stagnant situation. You ever wonder why it's so dysfunctional and everyone hates Congress, and yet what do? They vote them right back again. Congress has an approval rating of something like 8%. I mean, murderers are more respected than Congress people in national polls. There's only a few groups of people, pretty heinous people, that fall lower than Congress. And yet, we re-elect them over and over and over. Okay? So in this last election, if you were wondering why I said, oh, Cliff Benz will be elected to the 2nd District in Oregon, it's guaranteed. Now you know why. Because he came through the Republican primary, and he was in a Republican-packed district in Eastern Oregon. It doesn't matter who they run against him. He's winning. Okay? And he will be there as long as he wants. He will just keep getting elected and elected and elected. Just like Greg Walden got elected for 24 years, I think. You know, just like Nancy Pelosi always gets elected from her district. She has no challengers because it's all Democrat. All right? And on and on and on. So these are hard truths. These are uncomfortable issues. You need to, as a political science person, that's what this class is for, is take a step back from what's going on and analyze it, as opposed to dive in with your emotions and get all invested in it. Because is that person you're backing that you're so fervently for and excited for, did they already know how you're going to react? Okay? So we're going to talk about this more in class and look at the crash course on gerrymandering because it's an interesting topic. And really, because of these reasons, the next time that the United States revisits the Constitution, this is something that is just screaming for a constitutional amendment to change. So you say to yourself, but how can we change it without some major revolution? One is a constitutional convention, and I think we're going to be headed there in the next few years because the country's so divided. And this is a chance to rewrite things and get rid of gerrymandering. There are 2 states that have worked to get rid of gerrymandering, but only 2. One is Iowa, and so the state of Iowa looks a lot like this. It's a square. Its counties are distributed almost equally, and so what they do is they literally divide it just straight up and down lines, straight across, and they make it a grid pattern, and they say, okay, there you go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, it's a grid, and they get a pretty balanced result. And they also get very competitive districts. So they're one of the few places where Republicans and Democrats will switch back and forth in those races. And so what they're trying to do is always be there responsive to the people. And if you're not, you're out. So the districts in Iowa are very unsafe for the politicians. So that's how political science measure whether it's working or not, and they would say it is. The other state is Washington. Washington doesn't have this grid pattern. It can't. It has major centers of like Seattle and Spokane and very empty spaces in between. So what Seattle has done, is typical of the tech industry in Seattle, is that they have a computer algorithm that picks centers of population and spirals outwards until they get a district. Then they pick another center of population and spiral outward until they get a district. And then they pick another and spiral outward until they get a district. So you have these big districts out here, you have these small ones in Spokane and Seattle. So the state of Washington, again, has the same results as Iowa. They have very competitive districts. They have Republicans and Democrats flipping back and forth in their state legislature and in their national representatives. Okay? So what are the solutions for a constitutional convention? Is to employ either the Iowa solution, or if geographical oddities don't allow for that, the Washington solution, with its spiraling ability to draw districts based on an algorithm, that can be put into a constitutional amendment. Okay? So it's not all doom and gloom. There are solutions out there if the American people think about some of these things and say to themselves, we can make it change. All right? I'll see you in class.